Hello? Excuse me!
The Vampire Who Feared Death. Chapter 1. London, 1934. The fog had not yet risen from the river when the couple found the street. It was one of those forgotten corners of London that never seemed to hear laughter, a narrow vein of brick and soot wedged between two larger roads. The sign nailed to the doorway read, in faded black paint, "Rooms to let. Inquire after dark." The letters had begun to peel, the board creaking on its single nail as a draft pushed through the alley. The woman, Ellen, squinted up at it and frowned. "After dark," she murmured. "That's an odd hour for business." Her husband, Thomas, tightened his coat against the chill. "Odd hours or not, it's half what the landlord on Bishopsgate wants. We'll come back tonight." They knocked anyway, more from habit than hope. The sound was swallowed by the house. Thick walls, heavy silence. No reply, no footsteps. Even the pigeons on the roof did not stir. When they turned away, a sooty leaf skittered across the cobbles and settled against the step, as if marking the place they had stood. By evening, the city had changed. London was a theatre of mist. Gas lamps bloomed like dull orange moons, the air wet with cold smoke and the smell of the Thames. People hurried home from the trams, heads down, collars high, the sound of their shoes softened by fog. The poor of the East End moved like ghosts. Men with hollow eyes and newsprint for gloves, women clutching parcels of bread as though warmth itself were inside. At the corner where Ellen and Thomas returned, the sign still swung lazily on its nail. The letters were clearer now in the lamplight, black against yellow. They hesitated. Then Thomas rapped on the door. This time, footsteps. Slow, even. A bolt slid back. The man who opened the door looked as though he had been painted. His skin was unnaturally pale, the colour of paper, dusted with powder, and beneath the whiteness there was no hint of blood. A folded handkerchief covered his mouth and nose, held delicately between two gloved fingers. He wore a long black coat, pressed perfectly, black trousers, polished shoes, and a waistcoat so crisp it caught the faint lamplight. Though it was warm inside, he did not remove the coat.
"Good evening,"
he said, the words polite, distant. "You are here about the room?" "Yes, sir," Thomas answered, clearing his throat. "We saw the sign." The man inclined his head. "Then come in, if you please." They stepped into a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of damp wood and lavender polish. The walls were lined with framed photographs, none newer than 20 years past, and everyone seemed slightly askew, as if the house itself breathed unevenly. "I keep my rooms orderly," the landlord said, still holding the handkerchief before his face. "Cleanliness is a virtue, even in hard times." He led them upstairs. The gaslight hissed softly in its bracket, throwing a quivering glow along the stairwell. The room he showed them was small but tidy. A single bed, a washstand, a coal grate, with the ashes swept out. "The rent," he said, "is 12 shillings the week. You may pay in advance each Saturday. Late payment will not be tolerated. Ellen nodded quickly. That's fair, sir. My quarters are below, he continued. You will pass my door whenever you go in or out. I hear everything that happens in this house. I'm seldom awake by day, so I ask that you make no noise before dusk. At night, I am occupied. Should you require anything, leave a note at the base of the stairs. Thomas swallowed. Occupied, sir. The landlord's eyes lifted, grey, calm, unreadable. Business. We all have our work, Mr. Hollis. Yours in the daylight, mine in the dark. For a moment, no one moved. Then he inclined his head again, the gesture practiced, almost graceful. Welcome, he said softly. And remember, punctuality is a sign of respect. I expect my rent precisely on time. He turned, descending the stairs with measured steps, the black of his coat merging with the shadows below. Ellen and Thomas listened until the door to his rooms closed, and even the sound of breathing seemed to stop. Outside, the fog pressed against the window like a living thing, and the gas lamps burned a tired amber that barely reached the glass. From somewhere beneath the floor, they heard a faint, rhythmic sound, like the slow pacing of a man who could not rest. Chapter 2. The house at number 27 was silent, except for the dull hum of the gas lines and the distant roll of a carriage outside. Upstairs, laughter broke the stillness. Brief, light, human. Thomas and Ellen were putting on their coats, their voices mingling with the creak of the old stairs. You see? Ellen whispered. He's strange, yes, but he means no harm. Thomas grinned faintly. He'll change your tune when he asks for the rent.
Oh, I know.
They stepped through the front door and onto the narrow street, their footsteps fading into the fog. From the crack of his door below, the landlord watched. The slit of light from the hallway fell across one eye, unblinking. He followed them with that eye until they vanished into the mist. Only when their laughter was gone did he move, slowly with the stiff precision of someone rehearsing every gesture. The door clicked shut behind him. He turned and walked deeper into the house. The air changed. The hallway, dark oak panels, pale wallpaper, gave way to something else. The smell of lavender polish was replaced by dust, old candle wax, and metal. His living room was simple. A chair, a desk, a lamp that burned too low. But the back room, his sanctuary, was another matter entirely. He unlocked the door with 2 separate keys and stepped inside, sealing it carefully behind him. Here was the evidence of his fear. The walls were lined not with crosses or garlic, but with mirrors, dozens of them, faced inward. None of them reflected anything, of course, but he studied them all the same. Their glass had been treated with thin layers of silver nitrate and mercury, a faint shimmer moving beneath the surface. They weren't for reflection, they were for detection. When anything living entered the house, the air trembled and the mercury shifted. He could see intruders long before they reached his door. Above the windows hung charms of iron filings and brass wire, shaped like geometric sigils, devices of science, not faith. In one corner, a small machine of his own making ticked softly, measuring vibration through the floorboards. Should a stake, a blade, or even a heartbeat unfamiliar to the house move too close, the machine would rattle, and he would know. He had lined the door with layers of lead and salt, not to keep evil out, but to keep hunters from finding him. The salt confused dogs. The lead blocked the superstitious instruments, some called holy detectors, and the thick oak muted sound. In the far corner stood a steel cabinet bolted to the floor. Inside were files, papers, maps, notes on the men who had hunted his kind. Some were gone now, aged or dead, but he kept their names as one keeps scars. And on the wall, where a man might hang a family portrait, there was instead a framed newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. Local legend. Vampire burned in cellar body, turned to ash. He stared at it for a long moment, his hand tightening around the handkerchief still covering his mouth.
They burn us. They always burn us.
They burn us, he whispered behind the cloth. They always burn us. He turned to a small desk beside the lamp. Upon it lay a row of vials of powdered makeup, white as chalk, and a soft brush worn nearly to the handle. He began to reapply the powder to his face, in slow, mechanical strokes, his hand trembling. Beneath the powder, the skin was grey and splitting, but he avoided the mirror. There was no comfort there. Every night, he performed the ritual. Powder, coat, gloves, the act of pretending to be alive. When he had finished, he looked toward the curtained window. The fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. He reached for the lock, hesitated, then drew back. Outside was the world, the noise, the unpredictable heartbeats, and beyond that, somewhere unseen, death, the thing that did not end him, but consumed what he was. He whispered softly, voice trembling beneath the handkerchief. I feared to live another day. I live because I fear to die. Then he turned down the lamp, the room falling into that half-light between existence and oblivion, and listened to the house breathe around him, each creak and whisper a promise that he was still, for now, alone. The Vampire Who Feared Death. Chapter 3. The house sighed as the door opened. It was night again. London night. The kind that swallows sound. Fog rolled down from the river and pooled in the gutters, soft as breath, thick as guilt. Gas lamps glowed like small golden moons along the narrow street, their halos trembling in the mist. Somewhere in the distance, a tram bell clanged and faded. A policeman's whistle rose and died in a far-off street, cut short by the muffled hum of traffic and the hiss of rain on stone. The vampire stood at the threshold. He was still adjusting his gloves, still dusted white from the chalk that kept his face from looking too grey, too dead. The folded handkerchief covered his mouth as always, pressed gently against his skin like a burial shroud. His eyes moved left, right, then back again. The night was alive with things unseen. He whispered, voice trembling through the cloth.
Just one. Only enough to last the week.
But even as he said it, the other truth bled through. He didn't want to go. The fog outside wasn't just cold, it was dangerous. It hid them, the hunters, the curious, the righteous. He had heard them once before, in another city. Men who carried crosses they didn't believe in, and torches that burned too cleanly. He remembered the light, the shouting, the way his kind had screamed. The vampire stepped out into the fog. He locked the door behind him, twice, and turned the key so gently it didn't make a sound. The streets stretched before him, glistening with rain. The lamps reflected in puddles, stretching light into thin ribbons that wavered beneath his polished shoes. He walked slowly, as if every step might draw attention. Through the fog, silhouettes passed, men in long coats, women clutching their handbags, a horse-drawn cart carrying barrels, the slow hiss of its wheels echoing between the buildings. He flinched at every sudden sound, a door slamming, a shout, a drunkard laughing somewhere down by the docks. But he kept moving. The hunger always found its way through the fear. In Whitechapel, the fog grew denser, clinging to the lamps like a living thing. A man turned a corner ahead and vanished into the mist. The vampire paused, listening. The beat of a heart. There, slow, warm, close enough to taste. He whispered behind the handkerchief,
I'm sorry.
When he emerged again, there was only silence. No struggle, no scream, just the soft sound of footsteps fading into the fog and the faint metallic drip that followed after. He moved from street to street, shadow to shadow, the fear never leaving him. Each time he found another, 5, 6 by the end of the night. It was the same. No rage, no ecstasy, just necessity, just the desperate act of someone clinging to existence. The city seemed to breathe heavier as the hours passed. Somewhere behind him, a whistle blew, then another, the echo of boots striking cobblestones, the sharp cry of a woman as she stumbled upon something that should not have been there. "Dear God," someone shouted. "Fetch the police." The vampire pressed himself into a shadowed doorway, his breath shallow beneath the cloth. He could see them now, silhouettes gathering in the street, a lamp lifted high, faces pale and horrified. The whistle blew again, shrill and urgent. He turned away, trembling. "They'll come," he whispered. "They always come." And he hurried back through the maze of alleys, his reflection absent from every fogged window he passed, the sound of his own footsteps mingling with the faint wail of sirens in the distance. By the time he reached his house, the eastern sky was beginning to grey. He closed the door softly behind him, slid the bolt, and leaned against the wood, shaking. His hands were unsteady, the handkerchief stained faintly dark. He whispered through it one last time, voice hoarse, almost childlike. "I fear the night more than they ever will." And then he turned off the lamp. The fog outside pressed harder against the window, and the city resumed its breathing, heavy and endless. Chapter 4. The small room upstairs was still lit when the rest of the house had gone dark. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, kicking off his boots, while Ella brushed her hair in the mirror, the soft rasp of the bristles cutting through the silence. The air smelled faintly of dust and damp plaster, the kind of scent that never truly leaves a house built on old secrets. Down below, the landlord's footsteps had long since stopped. The lamps in the hallway burned low, leaving the corridors steeped in a heavy, honey-coloured gloom. "I'll just be a moment," Ella said, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. "The lavatory's in the yard, I think." Thomas nodded without looking up. "Don't be long. It's colder tonight." Outside, the fog had rolled in thick again, pressing against the walls like a tide. The bathroom was little more than a wooden shed, with a cracked porcelain basin and a door that didn't shut properly. Ella pulled it closed, shivering as she struck a match to light the small wall lamp. The flame flared, and then she heard it, a faint scratch behind the wall. She turned, staring at the cracked plaster where the paint had bubbled and flaked. Nothing. But as the flame steadied, she noticed a narrow slit in the panelling, no wider than the edge of a coin. And behind it, the faintest glint of light, an eye. For a moment, it didn't move, didn't blink. Then, very slowly, it drew back into darkness. Ella's breath caught. "Hello," she whispered. Her voice vanished into the fog beyond the thin door. Only silence answered. Thick, heavy, watching. Behind the walls, the vampire withdrew from the wall, his breathing slow and shallow behind the cloth, he still pressed to his mouth. The small cracks in the plaster were all over this house. Old vents, rotted seams, and he knew each one. He had used them for years to study those who came and went, to decide who might stay and who might feed him for another week. He had not meant to frighten her, but hunger made him reckless. He stepped away from the wall, glancing toward the staircase. The wood groaned under his feet. Upstairs, Thomas stirred. "That you, Ella?" Minutes later, Thomas pulled on his coat. "I'll fetch you something for supper," he said. "Try to keep warm." The door shut, and the sound of his steps faded down the street. The lamp in their room flickered, shadows rippling across the walls. And behind one of those shadows, behind a small sliver in the old oak door, another eye watched. The landlord stood just beyond the threshold, his hand pressed flat to the frame. His breathing fogged the air behind the handkerchief. From his angle, he could see her sitting on the bed, brushing her hair again, unaware that the wall itself seemed to be breathing with her. He leaned closer to the crack, and the wood creaked. Ella stopped brushing, her eyes lifted to the door. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then a floorboard creaked below and the sound vanished. In the basement, he moved like a ghost through the narrow hallway, back into his sanctuary. The mirrors caught the lamplight, throwing a dozen versions of him across the room. All pale, all watching. He sat at his desk, trembling fingers unfolding a newspaper. The headlines stretched across the top. Whitechapel murders continue. Police call for witnesses. Below it, another line. Killer still at large. Citizens warned to remain indoors. He stared at the words until they blurred. Then he whispered through the handkerchief. "They know. They've always known." The paper shook in his hands. He set it down and backed into the corner of the room, among his mirrors and sigils and small machines. The fog pressed against the window. The mercury in the glass trembled. He sank to the floor, his coat pooling around him, arms folded over his knees. His eyes darted from mirror to mirror, watching for movement, not from outside, but from within. "I don't want to die," he murmured. The words echoed softly around the room, caught and reflected a dozen times, until they no longer sounded human, and there he stayed, rocking gently in the dim light, while the fog thickened beyond the glass, a man of death, terrified of the one thing that would finally set him free. Chapter 5. The lamp burned low. Its light trembled across the mirrors, catching his reflection in 100 pale fragments. Each one stared back at him, the same white face, the same hollow eyes, but never whole, never one. The book lay open on his lap, its spine cracked, its pages yellowed with age. He knew every line by heart, yet still he read it, night after night, word by word, as if repetition might dull the terror it described. "When the immortal is destroyed," it said, "his body may perish, but his essence is drawn into the realm of Nocturna, the feeding grounds. There, his soul endures as sustenance, dissolving slowly through endless centuries, consumed by the very god who granted his hunger." He ran a trembling gloved hand across the page. The ink had begun to fade, the letters eaten away by time, but the meaning was burned into him. He whispered beneath the handkerchief pressed to his mouth. "The feeding grounds." The words were little more than breath. to exist forever, not as life, but as food. He turned his head toward the nearest mirror. The chalky powder on his skin glimmered faintly in the weak lamplight. Behind the reflection, the fog pressed against the window like a living thing. "I mustn't let them find me," he murmured. "I cannot go to that place. I will not go." He stood, the book still open in his hand. The mirrors around him seemed to listen. "I do not want to dissolve for the rest of eternity," he said softly, voice shaking, "to become nothing but nourishment for another. Even though I took his gift, even though I was cursed by it, I took it without knowing." His breathing quickened. The handkerchief trembled against his lips.
I'll keep feeding. I'll keep hiding.
"I'll keep moving if I must, but they'll never find me." He looked into the mirror again. The reflection stared back. Faint, ghostly, half a man. "I'll live," he said. "I'll live forever, because I will not give this life back to him." He pressed his hand to the cold surface of the mirror. The glass quivered slightly, and for an instant he thought he saw something move behind it. A shimmer, a pulse, as though something vast and patient stirred in the depths. He drew his hand away. "No," he whispered. "Not yet." The lamp flickered, its flame shrinking to a trembling point. Around him, the mirrors dimmed, the room falling into half-light. He looked once more at the book, at the promise of eternity turned to damnation, and spoke softly, almost to himself. "To live forever is to never rest. To never rest is to never be free. But still, I would rather live as fear than die as food." And with that, he closed the book, the sound of the old paper sharp in the silence. The fog thickened beyond the glass, and the mirrors seemed to hum faintly in response, as though somewhere deep within, Nocturna was listening. Chapter 6. The night had not yet broken. The fog clung stubbornly to the windows, muting every sound, when the vampire heard it. A knock. It was soft at first, a polite tap, then another. He froze where he sat, the book still open in his lap. His eyes darted to the door. No one ever knocked. Not at this hour. For a moment, he thought it might be the sound of the house itself settling, or the wind pressing against the door frame. But it came again. 3 measured knocks, each one louder than the last. He rose slowly, clutching the handkerchief tighter against his mouth. His other hand hovered near the lamp, ready to extinguish it. He stood still, listening. The knock did not come again, but there, a faint shuffling, the creak of a floorboard, the soft intake of breath. Whoever was out there was already inside. He turned toward the door that led to the main hall, his pulse quickening. The key trembled as he turned it, the bolt sliding back with a groan. He eased the door open a crack and peered through. Ella. Her figure was framed in the dim glow of the hallway lamp, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, hair a little tousled from sleep. Her eyes were cautious, but not afraid. He hesitated before opening the door wider. "Yes?" His voice came muffled through the cloth he still pressed over his mouth. "Is something wrong?" She hesitated in too, as if stepping into his room might be a mistake she couldn't undo. But the chill in the hall made her move forward, just one step. "The water," she said. "It's not running properly in the room. Thomas says the tap is dry." "Yes," he said quickly. Yes, the pipes. They're very old. He gestured towards the small table where a single lamp burned. Please, come in. She stepped across the threshold, glancing around. The room was barely furnished. A chair, a desk, a lamp. On the far wall, a heavy door with 2 locks gleamed faintly in the light. He saw her notice it. Her eyes lingered, curious. He followed her gaze, his breath catching. That's... it's nothing, he stammered. Just storage. Old things. He turned toward her, trying to smile beneath the cloth, but his eyes betrayed him. Her shawl had slipped slightly from her shoulder, and her neck, pale and slender, caught the light. He could see the pulse beneath her skin, steady and alive. He could hear it, a soft, rhythmic whisper beneath her words. Her voice was speaking, but all he could think of was that sound, the slow, patient beat of life. Yes, he said absently, his tone slipping lower. The water. I'll see to it. Her brow furrowed. Are you all right? Yes, he lied quickly, pressing the handkerchief tighter. It's nothing. But he could smell it now. Faint, warm, intoxicating. He looked away, pretending to check the lamp, but his hunger coiled and twisted under his skin like something alive. I'm sorry, she said after a moment. It's late. I shouldn't have come down. No, he said too quickly. You're always welcome. The words came out heavier than he meant them to, and she took a small step back, her eyes flicking again toward the double-locked door. There's another thing, she said quietly. I think someone's been watching us, through the wall. He froze. Watching you? I saw an eye, she said, in the lavatory, through a crack in the plaster. He swallowed, the cloth muffling his nervous breath. An eye? She nodded. I thought I imagined it, but... Yes, he interrupted softly. It's an old house. There are cracks, vents, perhaps a mouse. The walls, they make sounds. Her gaze held his. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she looked once more at the door with the double locks, and something in her expression changed. Curiosity gave way to unease. I should go, she said. Yes, he replied too quickly again. Go. I'll fix it in the morning. He moved toward the door, opening it for her, his movements stiff and hurried. Please, sleep well? She stepped into the hallway, looking back once, as if expecting him to follow, but he didn't. He simply stood there, hand still on the frame, watching until the light from the hallway swallowed her. Then he closed the door, bolted it twice, and leaned against it, trembling. Upstairs, Ella slipped back into the room. Thomas was half asleep, one arm draped across the bed. He stirred as she entered. Everything all right? The water, she said quietly. He said he'll fix it. Thomas grunted, eyes still closed. Good. She sat down beside him, staring at the floor. Thomas, she whispered. I think he's hiding something. He opened one eye. Who? The landlord. I think he's the one watching us. I saw the way he looked at me. He's not right. He kept staring, not just at me, but through me. Thomas sighed. Ella, he's just an old man. Lonely, probably. He's harmless. She shook her head.
Lonely, probably. He's harmless.
Harmless men don't lock doors with 2
bolts, and they don't watch women through cracks in the wall. He smiled faintly. Then hang our clothes over the cracks. That'll fix it. She gave him a sharp look, but he reached out, catching her hand. We've got nowhere else, Ella. The money's gone. If my job comes through next week, we'll find something better. But until then, it's this, or the street. She sighed and nodded. "I know." He pulled her close, his voice soft. "We'll get through this. We always do." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the slow rhythm of his heart. Steady, warm, alive. Outside, the fog pressed harder against the glass, and down below, behind his locked door, the landlord sat at his table, staring at the handkerchief in his hands, the faint scent of her blood still lingering in the air. Chapter 7. He had the key in his hand before he remembered why he had come to the door at all. The house smelled of lamp oil and old wood, the familiar, small things that had been his world for longer than he could remember. Outside, the fog rolled like a slow, thinking thing, pooling under the gas lamps and swallowing the street into a soft, uncertain night. He paused, palm against the oak, feeling the grain through his glove. The ritual was always the same. Coat, powder, handkerchief, careful footsteps down the narrow stair. Each movement was a rehearsal for anonymity. Each lock turned was a small defiance against the thing he feared most. Then voices, joyful, sharp, cut through the hush. A man's shout from the hallway, high and elated.
"Ella! Ella! They got him! They found him! They got the monster!"
Who is it?
He held his breath. Thomas's voice was loud with triumph, footsteps stomping up the stairs like a man carrying a prize. He could hear the slam of the front door, the clatter of keys. For a moment, the world outside the door became a stage, where neighbors clapped one another on the back, and the fog itself seemed to cheer. Who is it? Ella called, the way someone calls when they hope the news is for them.
Down at the market. They've caught him, burned the beast. They paraded him down the street like an example. They said it drank people like cattle.
Took their blood and left them nothing. They said a group hunted him down, set him alight. For a second, the vampire did not know how to breathe. His key pressed deeper into his palm until the metal bit. He moved without meaning to, out into the night as if pulled, the world narrowing to the sound of Thomas's jubilant voice and the thin shuttle of the fog against the window. At the corner, the newsstand was a small island of light.
Finally got him, didn't they?
Paper fluttered in the wind. He pushed between two men who smelled of ale and smoke and reached blindly for the pamphlet with the headline that screamed across it in black type. Creature destroyed. Local mob burns alleged killer. Below, the copy did not concern itself with nuance. An arrest, a chase, a blaze, the bodies found, the city's relief. The words burned and mob and celebration sat like coals on the page. The sentence at the end of the article, short, factual, final, felt like cold iron at his throat. He saw it as if someone else had cut it into his skin. The creature had been trapped. It had been burned until nothing remained but ash. The paper trembled in his hands. He could taste smoke on his tongue, as though flame had licked the very air. They could do that to him. They had done it before. He knew the ritual, the fury. He had watched, as a child of his kind, how men, not content with simple death, burned and branded and proclaimed the world safe. He had heard the jokes and the songs that men sang to rid themselves of fear. He had once been cornered in another town, where shouts had become a mob, and a torch turned daylight into accusation. He had run from them then, and he would run now. He did not feed that night. He moved with a speed that felt uncharacteristic, even to him. The hunger tightened under his ribs, a cold thing that whispered insistence, but the terror was louder. He backed into the house, bolted the door, as if bolting could put the world at bay, and fled down the narrow corridor to his sanctuary, the room that held 1,000 false mirrors and the little machines that rattled at the faintest misstep. Inside, the air felt too close, as if the mirrors themselves were breathing. He dropped the paper on the desk, the headline facing down, as if he could deny the world the sight of it. The mercury in the glass trembled when he entered. His gadgets ticked a thin, anxious cadence, as if to join his own pulse.
Surely they'll come for me next,
he said aloud to the mirrors, though the words were only for himself. The sound bounced back a dozen times, half-formed, unmanned echoes that dissolved into the lamp smoke. This is not just the doing of those fools in the streets. They find one. They've tasted the thrill. They will want more. They will not stop. He thought of the book he kept tucked under his coat, the passages about Nocturna that had made his hands shake since the first night he read them. The idea of being burned had always been terrible, but the book had a darker promise. There was a place beyond mere death for his kind, a feeding ground that consumed the essence of those who had once fed. Burned or destroyed, the consequence was the same. A shape of endless hunger awaited, a place that turned victors into vultures and turned the damned into the damned forever. He paced the length of the room, gloved hands rubbing at his face. Where the powder had settled into lines, he muttered, half prayer, half calculation, "I will not go there. I will not." He stopped at the largest mirror, and for a moment he searched his reflection for resolve and found only a man stitched together from fear and habit. "You give us the hunger," he breathed, as if addressing something that had no ears. "You gave us the thirst and the curse, and in return you want our end. No, I will not let you take me, because others have found a beast they could burn. I will hide. I will feed carefully. I will bury my traces. No one will find me." He thought with a short, bitter laugh of the residents upstairs. How easy a body was to hide in a city of bodies. Who would miss the nameless, the drifters, the ones who vanished between paydays and doorframes? He imagined free rooms for vagrants, coffins made of the economy of eviction, bodies that would not be noticed. Such thoughts curdled inside him, practical and cold. It was monstrous, and yet in that monstrousness lay a plan. Upstairs, muffled through the floorboards, life continued. Thomas's voice rose, full of hope.
I start next week. Maybe a little garden, Ella, think of it.
A garden?
Can you imagine? A flat with a gas cooker, no more this cold bed. Will be better, cleaner, maybe a little garden. Ella, think of it. Ella laughed, the sound light as a dropped coin. A garden, she said.
Thomas, you'll have us living like ladies.
They spoke of ordinary futures, pay, a better room, perhaps a child one day. Their hope was loud in its small, honest way, and it stabbed something in him that had nothing to do with hunger. He pressed his forehead to the glass of the mirror until the cold, vulgar words blurred. He was a man of necessities and calculations, of rituals and avoidance, but the night had changed its price. Men hunted without the old reasons now. They hunted to feel triumphant and to blot out a private terror with public spectacle. That shift made his own calculations raw. He sat down slowly in the corner of his room of mirrors and drew his knees to his chest, folding himself smaller until the coat shored up around him like a shelter. The machines ticked on. The mercury trembled. He mouthed to the glass, "I will not be taken. I will not suffer that end." Outside, the fog rearranged itself against the panes. The city he had fed upon for so long carried on oblivious to his vow. Inside, He listened to the fragile, ordinary hope of two people upstairs, and felt, for a warped second, both envy and pity. Then the hunger rose, raw and patient, and he breathed into the handkerchief until his voice was nothing more than cloth and breath. "If I must feed," he whispered to the mirrors and to the lamps and to the small machines and to whatever watched back from Nocturna, "I will do so on my terms. I will not hand myself to a pyre. I will not let them make me into an example." The night answered him only with the slow click of a distant cartwheel and the persistent, indifferent breathing of the fog. Chapter 8. The fog had rolled in thick again that night, pressing against the windows like a second skin. Upstairs, the single lamp in the small rented room burned low. Thomas sat at the table, papers spread before him, his pen scratching across the page in slow, thoughtful strokes. He was rehearsing for his new job. Figures, invoices, bits of handwriting practice. Every few minutes, he glanced towards the door, half expecting Ella to speak, but she had gone quiet. Downstairs,
Not again.
the pipes groaned. Then, silence. Ella frowned at the wash basin. She turned the tap again, but only a hollow cough of air came through. "Not again," she muttered. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I'll go tell him," she called to Thomas.
Be careful.
He didn't look up. "Be careful," he said absently, the pen still moving. The hallway was colder than before, the air heavy with that smell of damp and iron. The landlord's door at the end of the corridor stood slightly ajar, the yellow light from inside spilling faintly across the floorboards. She hesitated. "Hello?" she called softly. "It's Ella." "The water's gone again." No answer. She stepped closer, her shoes whispering against the wood. "Landlord?" Still nothing. Her fingers brushed the door and it creaked open on its own. The room beyond was dim. Only a single lamp on the desk flickered weakly. A chair, a table,
Hello?
the faint smell of
Landlord?
chalk and candle smoke. She took another step inside. "Hello?"
Hello?
Her eyes moved to the far wall, the heavy oak door with the double bolts. Only now, the bolts hung loose. Something clicked softly behind it. Tick, tick, tick. She swallowed. "Landlord?" No voice replied, only the measured sound. A machine, perhaps, or a clock, but too uneven, too deliberate. She reached the door and pressed her ear to the wood. The ticking was louder now, mechanical, rhythmic, alive. She turned the handle. It moved easily beneath her hand. The door opened. Her breath caught. Mirrors. Dozens of them, each facing inward, their glass shimmering faintly in the dim light of a single lamp. Strange shapes, wires twisted into patterns, geometric circles of brass, little charms of salt and iron dangling from nails. On one table, an instrument made of copper and string ticked in precise, uneven beats. The air was thick, too thick.
Landlord? Are you here?
She whispered. "Are you here?" The water stopped again.
Hello?
The door behind her slammed shut. The lamp flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed everything. The ticking went on, louder now.
Hello?
Tick, tick, tick. "Hello?" she gasped.
Please, this isn't funny.
No answer. Her hands reached into the dark, feeling along the air, fingertips brushing cold glass, metal. Nothing. The ticking filled her head. It wasn't just a clock. It was everywhere, under the floor, behind the walls, inside the mirrors. She moved towards where the door had been, arms stretched forward. Her palm struck something solid. Wood. No. Cloth. She felt the soft press of fabric, then something underneath it. Cold, unyielding, like marble. Her hand trembled. Slowly she reached upward. Skin, cold as stone. And then a breath. Right in front of her, the ticking stopped. A faint hiss of air, followed by a low, animal sound, like breath drawn through broken glass. The lamp flared. For a heartbeat, the room was bathed in sickly light. And he was there, the landlord, the man she thought she knew. His handkerchief was gone. The chalk-white powder had run in streaks down his cheeks, revealing the grey, splitting skin beneath. His eyes were wide, glassy, filled with something between terror and hunger. And his mouth was a ruin. Teeth jagged, decayed, blackened from within, like a graveyard of bone. Some were fangs still sharp, others broken, splintered. Dried blood stained the corners of his lips. He stared at her, not as a man looks at a woman, but as a starving animal looks at food. "Please," she whispered. He stepped closer. The ticking began again, faint, pulsing like a heartbeat. Her back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to move. He reached for her face, trembling, desperate. His eyes were wet with tears he didn't understand. "I'm sorry," he whispered behind what was left of his humanity. "I can't stop it." She opened her mouth to scream, but the sound barely left her throat before his shadow fell across her. The lamp dimmed, and the world became nothing but the sound of breath, and the ticking, and the silence that followed after. Outside, the fog pressed tighter against the glass. The city slept, dreaming it was safe. Chapter 9. The clock on the small table struck midnight with a thin metallic note. Thomas barely noticed. He was bent over his papers, the candle burned to a stub. He rubbed his eyes and smiled faintly. 2 more days, he thought. 2 more days and the job would begin. A better life for him and Ella. A knock came at the door. He looked up, frowning. "Ella?"
Ella? Come in.
The door creaked open, but it wasn't Ella. The landlord stood there, his black coat immaculate, his face powdered, ghost white, and the familiar handkerchief pressed neatly to his mouth. His eyes glinted from the half-dark, like shards of coal. "Thomas," he said softly, "Ella is downstairs. She needs you." Thomas blinked, confused. "Downstairs? Why would she?" "She needs you," the landlord repeated, voice muffled behind the cloth. Something in the tone froze Thomas mid-step, but worry for Ella overtook caution. He stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "All right, I'm coming." He walked toward the door, and the instant he came close, the handkerchief dropped. A pale, veined hand shot forward and closed around his throat. Thomas gasped. It wasn't a man's grip. It was a steel vice, cold and absolute. He clawed at the arm, but it didn't move. His eyes went wide, locked with the creature before him. The landlord's lips pulled back, revealing teeth that were no longer human. Jagged, decayed, blackened by rot and age. He spoke, his voice vibrating like something spoken from beneath the earth. "It's not just stories about us," he hissed. "We have powers." Thomas tried to scream, but no sound came. The vampire's eyes bore into his, twin mirrors of endless night. Thomas's body stiffened, his limbs went slack, and then the voice was inside his head. Cold, whispering, threading through his thoughts like smoke through cracks. Memories bent, faces melted. His mind folded in on itself until there was nothing but the whisper. You are nothing. You are mine. The vampire let go. Thomas fell to his knees, clutching his throat, gasping like a man drowning in air. The creature stood over him, adjusting his coat, pulling the handkerchief back up over his mouth with slow precision. His breathing was calm again, controlled. He turned, disappearing for a moment into the shadows of the hall. When he returned, he carried something heavy in his arms, a shape wrapped in fabric, limp and small. He let it drop. Ella's hair spilled across the floor like a dark halo, her skin pale against the boards. The vampire tilted his head, looking between her and the trembling man before him. His voice was calm now, almost polite. My, Thomas, he said quietly. We've been a naughty boy. What will the police say? Thomas whimpered, half words spilling from his mouth. No language, only fear. The landlord bent, straightening his tie in the reflection of a darkened mirror. And then, as though remembering a performance long rehearsed, he began to fix himself. The powder, the gloves, the cloth. He walked to the front door. He paused only once, taking a breath through the fabric that covered his ruined mouth. Then, with all the strength of the theatre in him,
Murder!
He screamed,
Police!
Murder!
Help!
Police, help! Help! His cry cut through the night like a blade. Lamps flickered on in windows. Doors opened. The sound of footsteps came from the street, boots striking cobblestone, the shrill blast of a whistle. Within moments, 2 figures in navy wool appeared, helmets gleaming in the lamplight. What's this? Barked one, a broad-shouldered constable with a heavy moustache and tired eyes. Thank heavens you've come, the landlord said, voice trembling behind the handkerchief. They've been renting upstairs. The young couple. I heard terrible noises, shouting. He's gone mad. I'm sure of it. I'm too weak to intervene. Please help. The constable frowned. You saw the man attack her. I dare not look, said the landlord. I'm ill, you see. Dying. My liver. Cancer. The doctor calls it jaundice. I've but months left. He dabbed his forehead with a cloth. I powder my face to spare others the sight. Better to be white than yellow, I think. Please, officers, go. Help the poor girl if it's not too late. The constable signalled his partner. Stay here, sir. They moved quickly up the stairs. Their boots thudded against the steps, echoing through the narrow hall. The landlord followed only to the base of the stairwell. The door to his own room cracked just enough for him to see. A moment later, a shout. Good Lord! Then another. She's dead. And the man. Thomas was crouched on the bed, his hands stained, his mouth open in a soundless moan. His eyes were wide and unfocused, darting from corner to corner, seeing nothing. When he saw the 2 policemen, he began to laugh, a hollow, broken laugh, before hurling himself towards them. Look out, one cried. They grappled with him, dragging him down, their whistles shrieking for help. Downstairs, the landlord watched through the crack, calm once more. Soon the street filled with commotion, neighbours leaning from windows, curious faces pressed to the fogged glass of the tavern across the lane. The bobbies called for a wagon, their voices carrying over the cobblestones. A cart arrived. They led Thomas out, bound and muttering incoherently, eyes wild. Behind him came another cart, the one for the body. The landlord stood at his door, hands folded politely before him, the picture of frailty and sorrow. "Terrible," he murmured. "Truly terrible." One of the constables turned to him. "You'll need to make a statement at the station, sir." Of course," the vampire said gently. "But please, be patient with me. I'm very ill, you see. I won't be much longer in this world. Let me rest a little. I'll come as soon as I'm able." The constable nodded, softening. "You take care, sir." As the men left, the landlord slowly closed the door. The fog curled in from the threshold like smoke returning to the fire. He turned, leaning against the wall, and exhaled through the cloth, a faint tremor in his breath. "Rest in peace," he whispered. "Both of you." Then he smiled, a dry, colourless thing behind the handkerchief, and whispered, barely audible, "And thank you for keeping me alive." Chapter 10. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. The fog had dulled itself into a soft hum beyond the windows, wrapping the street in its grey, endless sleep. Inside, the landlord sat by his lamp. The same low flame that never quite banished the shadows. His mirrors stood like sentinels, his charms and wires ticking faintly in their rhythm of paranoia. He had been still for hours, hands folded, the faint sound of his breath hidden behind the handkerchief. His chalk-white face seemed carved from wax. The hunger had quieted for now, replaced by that old companion, the fear of what waited when the hunger stopped. Then came a knock, 3 slow raps. He froze, but this sound, this rhythm, wasn't new. It was measured, deliberate, the kind that carried memory. He rose slowly, the joints in his knees creaking, and crossed to the door. For the first time in months, he opened it without hesitation. A figure stood in the threshold, a man in a long black coat, gloved hands, and a tall hat that glistened faintly with rain. His face, too, was pale beneath the brim, and his eyes were old enough to remember fire and stake, sermon and superstition. They looked at one another for a moment. Then the landlord stepped aside. "Be seated, friend." The visitor removed his hat, stepping into the lamplight. His voice was low and smooth, though something hungry lurked beneath it. "So," he said, glancing around the room, "you're still with us then?" The landlord nodded, gesturing to the single chair opposite. "I don't go out much now," he said, settling back into his seat. "I'm like a spider, perhaps. I wait, and I lure them in. It's safer that way." "Very wise," said the visitor, sitting with a soft rustle of cloth. "You know they're out there still, the hunters. They grow cleverer with every generation." "Yes," murmured the landlord, "but so do we." The man smiled faintly, showing the faintest glint of something sharp behind his lips. "The streets have been quiet, too quiet. It's ripe for the hunt, ripe for a feed. I think I'll go out tonight." The landlord's eyes flicked towards the window, where the fog swirled lazily against the glass. "Be careful out there," he said softly. "It's not like the old days. The older we grow, the nearer we drift to him." The other vampire looked up sharply. The landlord continued, voice low. "The more we age, the more the hunger decays us. He calls to us through it. The God who made us, he wants us back. His hunger is unending." The visitor nodded once. "Then let him wait. I'm not ready to be eaten." He stood, placing the hat back upon his head. The lamplight caught his eyes again, deep, knowing and cruel. As he reached the door, he paused. "There's talk among the few of us who remain," he said. "Whispers in the alleys, carried through the dark. They say one of our kind walks the city still. Clever, quiet, different." The landlord tilted his head. "Different how?" The stranger hesitated. "He doesn't feed for pleasure, nor for sport. He feeds only on those who do harm. Thieves, murderers, the cruel. No one misses his meals." The landlord's eyes narrowed slightly. A curious philosophy for a monster. The visitor smiled. "Perhaps, but clever. He survived longer than most of us. There's talk he's centuries old." "Who is he?" the landlord asked, his tone almost cautious. "I dare not say," said the man, turning back toward the fog. "I've never met him. They speak of him in the shadows, like a myth. Some call him Redemption." The landlord gave a soft, mirthless chuckle. Interesting concept." The man tipped his hat. "Enjoy your solitude, old friend." "And you," said the landlord, "enjoy your hunt." The door closed behind him with a dull click. The fog swallowed him whole before his footsteps had even faded. The landlord stood there for a long time, listening to the silence return. Then slowly, he reached for the small brush on his table and reapplied the white powder to his face. The ritual of pretending once more. When he was done, he crossed to the window. The street outside was still and empty. He reached up, adjusting the wooden sign that hung by the door. The letters carefully redone, the words faint but clear in the gaslight. "Rooms to rent, hot water, clean, good rates." He stepped back, admiring it for a moment. Then he whispered through the cloth, "Always room for one more." And as the fog crept tighter around the lamplight, the door swung open just a little. Ready for its next guest. End